Some stories begin with a bang, others start with a whisper. This one begins with the soft sound of gravel under worn boots and the unexpected flutter of a heart that had almost forgotten how to race. I've shared nearly 40 years with my husband Michael. 4 decades of mornings over coffee, evenings on the back porch, and all the ordinary moments that fill a life between. We've made our home in a small house nestled in the rolling hills of Northern California. From our back porch, you can see the old oak trees stretching their arms wide, and if you look just right, you can catch the silver glint of the river dancing in the distance. Our life isn't fancy anymore. Truth is, I don't want it to be. There's something comforting about knowing what each day will bring. Michael has his morning paper and his evening news. I have my garden and my books. We move through our days like two dancers who've learned each other's steps so well, we barely need to think about it anymore. When Michael told me he needed to fly out to Ohio, I wasn't surprised. His sister had just had surgery, nothing too serious, but enough that she needed help getting her affairs in order. That's just who Michael is. Family comes first, always has. Even after all these years, it's one of the things I love most about him. You should go, I told him, meaning it. Your sister needs you. He asked if I wanted to come along, like he always does. But the thought of cramped airplane seats, cold guest bedrooms, and making small talk with relatives I barely know just didn't sound appealing. My bones aren't as young as they used to be, and my patience for long trips has grown thin over the years. I'll be fine here, I assured him. The house and I will keep each other company, and I meant it. I really did. 3 days after Michael left, the phone rang while I was washing the dinner dishes. It was him, calling from his sister's kitchen. The sound of family chatter filling the background. Everything okay at home? He asked, like he always does. Quiet as a church mouse, I replied, drying my hands on the old blue towel. Then he mentioned Jack. Did I remember Jack? Of course I did. Jack Morrison, Michael's old army buddy. They'd served together decades ago and had stayed friends ever since. The kind of friendship that picks up right where it left off, even after months of not talking. He wants to come by and get some of his fishing gear, Michael explained. We left it in the shed after our last trip to the lake. Would that be okay with you? I didn't hesitate. Of course. Tell him to come by anytime. Jack had always been easy to have around. A few years younger than us, somewhere in his late 50s, I figured. He had this way about him that was both solid and playful at the same time. Army training had given him straight shoulders and careful eyes, but years of civilian life had softened the edges. His hair had gone completely silver, but it suited him, made him look distinguished, like an actor playing a wise grandfather in some heartwarming movie. The last time I'd seen him was maybe 6 months ago, when he and Michael had spent a Saturday afternoon loading up tackle boxes and arguing about which bait worked best for bass. He'd complimented my lemonade iced tea then, calling it the best west of the Mississippi. I'd laughed and told him he was full of charm and not much else, but that was Jack. Always ready with a smile and something nice to say. The next afternoon, I was in the kitchen putting away the lunch dishes when I heard a truck pulling into our gravel driveway. Through the window, I watched Jack climb out, moving with that careful way people do when their backs remind them they're not 20 anymore. He knocked on the front door, and when I opened it, there was that same easy smile I remembered. Afternoon, Sarah, he said, touching the brim of his baseball cap like an old-fashioned gentleman. Hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all, I replied, stepping back to let him in. Michael said you'd be coming by. He looked good. A little grayer maybe, a few more lines around his eyes, but there was something warm and steady about his presence that filled up the entryway. Would you like some iced tea before you head out to the shed? I asked, already moving toward the kitchen. I just made a fresh pitcher. Still making that famous lemonade tea? He asked, following me down the hall. Even better, I said with a laugh. I've perfected the recipe since your last visit. It was just friendly conversation. The kind of easy back and forth that happens between people who've known each other for years. Nothing more, nothing less. But as I poured the tea into 2 tall glasses, adding ice that clinked softly, I found myself taking a little extra care, making sure the glasses were clean, that the tea was the right color, that everything looked just so. Here you go, I said, handing him a glass. We settled at the kitchen table, the same table where Michael and I had eaten thousands of meals. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The light caught the silver threads in Jack's hair, making them shimmer like spun metal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but there was something different about the silence. Something I couldn't quite name. Then Jack looked up at me, and I felt something shift. It was subtle, like the change in air pressure before a storm, but I felt it all the same. He wasn't looking at me the way people usually do with that casual, automatic recognition you give to familiar faces. This was different, more focused, more present. You look well, Sarah, he said quietly. Really well. There was something in his voice, something gentle and careful, that made my cheeks warm. It had been a long time since anyone had really looked at me, really seen me, not just as Michael's wife or the woman who made good iced tea, but as me. Thank you, I managed, curling my fingers around my glass to give my hands something to do. We began to talk then, really talk. About everything and nothing. He told me about his kids. His daughter had just started college. His son was working construction like his dad used to. I told him about my sister's new grandbaby and the book club I'd joined but wasn't sure I liked. He made me laugh with a story about his neighbor Mr. Peterson, who'd gotten into an argument with the mailman about where exactly the mailbox should be placed. Apparently, it had escalated to the point where both men were out there with measuring tapes, arguing over inches. Some people, Jack said, shaking his head with amusement, have too much time on their hands, and too little sense, I added, which made him laugh, a rich, genuine sound that filled the kitchen in a way I hadn't heard in ages. I found myself studying his face as he talked. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he gestured with his hands when he got excited about something. The way he tilted his head slightly when he listened, like every word I said mattered. When had someone last listened to me like that? When I got up to refill our glasses, I felt his eyes follow me, not in any improper way, but with a kind of attention that made me suddenly aware of how I moved, how I looked. I caught my reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator, and was surprised to see that I was smiling. You ever get lonely out here when Mike's away? He asked as I sat back down. The question caught me off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was so direct, so honest. I considered lying, giving him the easy answer that no, of course not, I was perfectly fine on my own. But something about the way he asked, the genuine concern in his voice, made me want to be truthful. Sometimes, I admitted, stirring my tea even though it didn't need stirring. But I like the quiet too. Most of the time. He nodded slowly, understanding. Quiet can be good, he said, but sometimes it can be too loud, if that makes any sense. It did make sense. Perfect sense. The kind of quiet that fills up with all the thoughts you try not to think, all the feelings you try not to feel. The quiet that echoes with everything that's missing. It does, I said softly. We sat with that for a moment, both of us understanding something that didn't need to be said out loud. After a while, Jack finished his tea and pushed back from the table. I should probably get that gear before it gets too late, he said, but he didn't move to get up right away. I walked him out to the shed, which sat at the back of our property under a cluster of pine trees. Michael kept it organized like everything else in his life: tools on one wall, fishing equipment on another, seasonal decorations stored neatly in labeled boxes. Jack found his tackle box and a couple of fishing rods easily enough. As he gathered his things, I found myself not wanting him to leave. Not yet. The afternoon had been nice, really nice. It had been a long time since I'd had a conversation that made me feel so alive, so present in my own skin. Got everything? I asked, as he loaded the last of his gear into his truck. I think so, he said. But then he paused, one hand on the truck door, looking back at me. There was something he wanted to say, I could tell, something that was making him hesitate. You know, he finally said, his voice softer than before, if you ever need anything while Mike's gone, help around the house, or even just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to call. I mean that. There was such kindness in his offer, such genuine care, but there was something else too, something that made my heart beat just a little faster. That's very sweet of you, I said, meaning it. He smiled then, that boyish smile that took years off his face. Well, I better let you get back to your evening. I watched him drive away, his truck disappearing around the bend in our long driveway. But even after he was gone, I could still feel the warmth of his presence, like the lingering heat from a fire that's just been put out. That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, brushing my hair with long, slow strokes. In the soft light, of the bedside lamp. I looked at myself, really looked for the first time in months. When had the lines around my eyes deepened? When had my hair gotten so much silver in it? But there was something else I saw too. Something I hadn't noticed in a long time. A brightness in my eyes. A flush in my cheeks. A woman who had been reminded, however briefly, that she was still very much alive. I thought about Jack then, more than I probably should have. About the way he'd looked at me, listened to me, made me laugh. About the careful way he'd spoken, as if my feelings mattered. As if I mattered. Michael loved me, of course he did. We'd built a good life together. A solid life. But somewhere along the way, we'd settled into something comfortable and predictable. Like two old stones that had been polished smooth by time, resting peacefully side by side. Safe, but no longer capable of striking sparks. When had we stopped? Really? Seeing each other? The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. I woke before dawn, which wasn't unusual. But instead of lying in bed listening to the birds wake up, I found myself padding to the kitchen in my robe and slippers. The house felt different somehow. More alive, more full of possibility. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. The light crept across our property slowly, touching the oak trees first, then the garden, then finally spilling through the kitchen windows to warm my face. For the first time in months, I felt truly awake, almost without thinking. I found myself pulling ingredients from the pantry: flour, sugar, butter, baking powder. My old wooden mixing bowl, the one with the small chip on the rim that I'd been meaning to replace for years but never did because it felt like an old friend. I hadn't made scones in ages. Years maybe, but my hands remembered the rhythm of it. The way to cut cold butter into flour until it looked like coarse sand. How to mix in just enough cream to bring the dough together without overworking it. The gentle touch needed to pat it out and cut it into perfect triangles. As I worked, I told myself this was just being neighborly. Jack had been kind enough to bring me jam yesterday. Yes, that's right. He'd brought me a jar of his homemade strawberry jam, claiming I'd left something in the shed, but really just being thoughtful. The least I could do was make something to go with it. It was perfectly innocent, perfectly reasonable, but my hands shook slightly as I brushed the tops of the scones with cream and sprinkled them with sugar, and when I slid them into the oven, I found myself checking my reflection in the oven door, smoothing my hair, retying my robe. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard gravel crunching under tires. My heart did something funny in my chest, a little skip, like it had forgotten how to keep proper time. I watched through the window as Jack climbed out of his truck, and I was struck again by how good he looked. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt and jeans that had been pressed. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved. Had he taken extra care with his appearance too? The knock came soft but confident. I took a deep breath, checked myself one more time in the hallway mirror, and opened the door. There he stood, that familiar smile spreading across his face, holding 2 paper coffee cups like an offering. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice warm as honey. "Figured if you were handling the food, I could at least bring the coffee." The smell of fresh coffee mixed with his aftershave, something clean and woody that reminded me of the forest after rain. "Well," I said, stepping aside to let him in, "you have perfect timing. They just came out of the oven." As he passed by me in the doorway, I caught another whiff of that aftershave, and something deep inside me stirred, something that had been sleeping for so long I'd almost forgotten it was there. "Something smells incredible," he said, following me toward the kitchen. "Just scones," I replied, but I was pleased by the compliment, more pleased than I should have been, and as we walked down the hall together, the morning light streaming through the windows and the promise of fresh scones and good coffee ahead of us, I realized that something had shifted. Something small but significant, like the first crack in ice that's been frozen solid all winter. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, wasn't sure what it would lead to, but for the first time in years, I was curious to find out. We sat at the kitchen table again, this time, facing each other fully. No pretense off small talk needed. The scones disappeared quickly between us and we drifted into that same easy rhythm off conversation. Only this time it felt a little more personal. He asked about my art. I used to paint landscapes years ago, watercolors of the river bend, the fieldshy blue-gray fog that would settle after summer rains. I hadn't picked up a brush in nearly a decade, but I kept a few pieces framed in the hallway. "Would you stop?" he asked, as I scanning the delicate strokes in one of the paintings across the room. I hesitated. Life got in the way. Work, raising kids, taking care of things. You mean taking care of everyone else? Hesitated quietly, his gaze returning to me. There was no accusation in his voice, just understanding. And it hit deeper than I expected. I looked down at my coffee cup, tracing through him with my finger. Guess it's easy to forget who you are when you're always being something for someone else. He didn't respond right away, but the silence felt full, not empty. It held something unspoken, something that hummed just beneath the surface. Ox set his cup down and leaned back slightly. I thought about you so, Metamascarin. Not in a weird way, just wondered how you were doing, if you were still painting jiwa or happy. That word sat heavy between us. Happy. Opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first, because what did happiness even look like at this point in life? Was it routine? Was it safety? Or was it something else? Something I hadn't let myself explore in years. Instead of answering, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. I pulled out an old portfolio from the closet and carried it back to the table. I haven't shown the seat to anyone in a long time, I said. As I opened it, spreading out the pages, I looked through them carefully, reverently. These are beautiful, Karen. You have achieved. His voice was low, sincere, not the kind of compliment meant to flatter, but the kind that sees so mything real and wants to honor it. You ever think about starting again? He I've thought about it, I admitted, but I don't know if that part of me is still alive. Jack leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. She is. I can see her. For a long moment neither of us spoke. There was something in the air, charged but not dangerous, close but respectful. It was as if he'd reached into a part of me I had boarded up long ago and knocked gently, reminding me I was still there behind it all. Then he stood and gathered his coffee cup. I should get going, he said, his voice softer now. Didn't mean to stay. You didn't, I replied too quickly. I caught myself and smiled. It was nice having someone to talk to. Jack nodded. Same here. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back. Would it be all right if I came by again sometime? I didn't need to think. Yes. I'd like. They'd left, and I stood by the window watching his truck disappear down the long gravel path. Me heart wasn't pounding. It wasn't some silly crush or fleeting moment of midlife excitement. It was something quieter, something that moved beneath the surface, like the gentle pull off a current you don't notice until you're halfway across the river. That afternoon, I unpacked my old easel from garage. It was dusty, the wood warped just slightly from years of neglect. But it stood strong. Once I set it up in Thiessen room, I found a small canvas, pulled out my brushes, and began to paint. Not because of Jack, but because of what hair reminded me I had buried. Be evening, the house felt a little less quiet, a little less lonely. The air seemed lighter, as if it too had noticed the change inside me. And when I lay down to sleep, I found myself smiling, not from excitement or confusion, but from the strange comfort of being truly seen again. The days that followed unfolded like soft pages of a forgotten book, familiar, yet touched by something new. Jack didn't come by every day, but when did, it felt natural, like the kind of company that doesn't fill the silence, but shares it. Own afternoon, I found myself in Thiessen room again, brush in hand, painting the field behind our house as the light dipped into gold. I hadn't felt this connected to my own mind in years, not just to the act of painting, but to myself as a woman, as someone who once had dreams, quiet hopes, and a sense of wonder. The doorbell rang just as I was cleaning. Me Brushes stood there with a half smile and a small bag in his hand. Brought you something, he said, holding it up. Inside was a tiny sketchbook bound in deep blue leather. Figured if you're painting again, maybe you'd want to sketch too. Sometimes it helps, just to keep things flowing. I didn't know what to say at first, not because I didn't appreciate the gesture, but because no one had given me something so thoughtful in a long time. Thank you, Jack. Really. We sat out back that day under the wide maple tree near the fence line. He told me about his daughter, how she'd moved to Oregon with her husband and barely called anymore. I listened, truly listened, and when he laughed at himself for being a sentimental old fool, I gently to shed his arm. You're not foolish for missing Zamion you love. That moment lingered longer than it should have. His hand turned slightly under mine, but he didn't move. Our eyes met, and the quiet between us became heavy, as if the air itself were holding its breath. He pulled my hand back slowly. Unsure, conflicted, stood and walked to the edge of third, needing a second to steady the thoughts racing through me. Jack, follow at a moment later. Karen, he said, his voice measured. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, I said, Turning to face him, I'm not used to this. To what? To someone seeing me? I exhaled, not as a wife or a mother, just as me. He looked at me for a long time. That's Alice, and I think you're extraordinary. Heart tugged painfully, both in longing and guilt. I loved Michael. That hadn't changed, but love. Love isn't always the absence of something. Elsa sometimes it's a room with more than one light. Jack stepped closer, but he didn't touch him. He stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet gravity it carried. I'm not here to make things harder for you, he said, but I won't lie. I care about you. The honesty in his voice struck something deep. There was no pressure in it, no agenda. Just truth. You don't know what to do with that, he admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to do anything. I'm here when you need me, as a friend or whatever you need. Elect. Shortly after giving Miss Bocce that night, I sat alone in the sunroom long after the light had faded, staring at my unfinished painting. Mimmin swirled with memories of Michael Estadines, his kindness, his worn flannel shirts and quiet smiles. And Jack Slaughter, his attention, the way he made him feel like someone rediscovered. Was it wrong to enjoy both? Was it betrayal simply to feel seen by another person? I didn't know. The next morning, I received a text from Jack. Just a simple message: thinking of you today. Hope you're painting. I stared at the screen, a small smile creeping across my face. Despite myself later that day, as I sat outside with a sketchbook in my lap, Michael called. His voice was upbeat. His sister was covering well and he planned to be home, and Daisy should have felt excited. And part of me did, but another part, quiet and conflicted, felt something else. Like themed of something that hadn't quite begun. When I hung up, I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me, rustling the leaves, whispering things I wasn't ready to say aloud. By dusk, Jack's truck pulled into the drive again. This time I didn't wait inside. I met him halfway. I've been thinking too, I said. He nodded gently. I don't know what this is, I told him, honestly, but it means something to me. You mean something to me. Jack reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek in a gesture so tender it broke something open inside me. I know, he said. That's enough for now. He didn't kiss me, he didn't hold me. We simply stood in the fitting light, letting the truth of it settle into our skin. It wasn't an affair, it wasn't even physical, but it was something far more complicated. An emotional crossing, a rediscovery, a kind-of connection that didn't ask for permission. And it had changed me. Michael came home on a Thursday afternoon. He had baked a pie, piece in his favorite, and folded fresh towels in the guest room, even though he wouldn't need them. I didn't know why I was nervous. He was my husband, my partner for nearly 40 years, and yet, as I watched his car pull into the drive, my heart fluttered in a way that felt unfamiliar. In it, from anticipation, from uncertainty, I walked in with that same quiet smile, his suitcase in one hand and his coat slung over the other. You cut your hair, he said almost immediately. Noticing the few inches I'd trimmed while he was gone, I did felt like a change. He kissed me cheek, warm, brief, familiar. The smell of his cologne filled the hallway, and for a moment everything felt normal again, but I wasn't the same woman he had left behind over dinner. He told stories about his sister's recovery, the cold weather, and Ohio, how much he missed a real California tomato. I listened. Laugh had filled his glass when it was low. Butte inside, a part of me was somewhere else, lingering in the pauses, the moments I didn't notice, the small shifts in method. Night we lay in bed together. He fell asleep quickly, snoring softly like always did. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, turning in slow circles, my hands folded over my stomach. Thought about Jack, not with longing but with clarity. What we shared hadn't been about romance, it had been about being seen, being old as a woman, still full of feeling, still capable of desire and change and growth. He had sparked something I hadn't even known was dormant. But I also thought about Michael, about all the years we had stood side by side, through cancer scares, through our son struggles with addiction, through financial droughts and emotional winters. She had been steady, safe, constant. Still waste. Next morning, as we had coffee on the back porch, I told Michael I wanted to start painting again. He looked surprised, then smiled. I always liked your paintings. You used to be so lost in them. I wasn't lost, I said. I was found. He nodded slowly, the meaning settling in. He didn't press. He didn't ask why now. He just reached for my hand and held it gently. Later that afternoon, I wrote Jack a letter. Not a text, not a call. Aurelatory thanked him for reminding me who I was, for showing me a version of myself I had nearly forgotten, for the attention, the respect, the emotional honesty. But I also told him I had chosen to stay present in the life I had built, not because it was easier, but because it mattered, because Michael deserved my full self, not the half of me that wandered into hidden corners. And I deserved honesty. I never heard back from Jack, and I didn't expect to. That was part of what made it beautiful. It was a chapter, not a life. A brief moment where two souls recognized something kinder in each other. Weeks passed, then months. Mitchell and I found new ways to connect. He began painting every morning with coffee by my side. He started walking with me in the evenings, listening more closely, holding my hand a little longer. There were days I still thought of Jack, not with guilt or regret, but with gratitude, because sometimes it takes an unexpected present to awaken what routine has quietly buried. In the end, nothing scandalous happened. No one was betrayed, but something inside me changed for very. Found the courage to reclaim parts of myself I thought were gone. I realized that it's never too late to rediscover your voice, your light, your sense of being fully alive. As I stood in the sunroom one golden morning, brush in hand, canvas half filled with color and movement, I smiled to myself. He was no longer waiting to be seen. I had seen myself, and that was more than